So really excited to be joined here by John Van Meter, one of the great sprint freestylers in the history of the state of Michigan. And we'll talk about all the specifics that justify a statement like that, but he absolutely earned it during the late 70s when he rose to be probably one of the best. John, would you say 25 or 30 best sprinters in the world?
Yeah, and my career, in the late 70s, yes, I was definitely in the top 25 in the world.
We can say that. And there's not many people on this list that ever rose to be in the top 25 in the world. So there's no question that you belong on this list. John, I'd love to start with you with the first question that I've asked every single swimmer in this series. Can you take me back to when swimming was introduced to you as a sport and you immersed yourself in it?
Yeah, as I get older, it's harder to remember some of this stuff, but I want to say somewhere in the six or 7-year-old range. As young boys, our parents get us into a lot of different things, and so I remember, playing some basketball with, limited success. I was kind of gangly. I was probably, I was a tall kid for my size, for my age, and I played a little football, which I didn't like a lot. The contact was not my gig. Baseball, basketball, football. So I was, average at all of them really. And then, I was swimming, doing, taking lessons and whatnot. And then somewhere in that range of 6 to 8 years old, in some of the age group meets, basically I'd had more success with that. And I just gravitated towards something that, that I was good at. And I was, having a lot of fun.
Did it come immediate? Did you immediately realize that you seemed to be better than your peers?
I don't know if I would say immediate. I mean, maybe not the first year, but very quickly, it was apparent to me that, especially looking back in hindsight, that when I swam my races, I just didn't get beat very much.
Of course. You mentioned we. Can you tell me about your siblings and kind of the family culture at that time as you were growing up?
I have two sisters that are older. I'm the youngest of three, and it was my middle sister. She swam some, and she was a pretty good swimmer. The oldest sister had attempted. She wasn't athletically that talented in swimming. So the middle sister, Chris, and I swam, and my father would take us to a lot of the meets. And if we really wanted to go to a big meet, you kind of alluded to it, in our intro when we were just chatting. We always had to go to the east side of the state. When I was swimming, there was no 50-meter pool on the west side of the state. So, that was a blessing and also a curse for me in my career. Is that I would have no question I would have been a much better international swimmer and potentially Olympic swimmer had we had access to the long course pools. That was a huge hindrance for guys like John Newton and myself, because all we had was a short course pool to work with. And so, we were pretty explosive and very, very good swimmers at short course, but long course was a real challenge for a lot of us. That, that was like the ocean to us.
I can imagine, with the swimming scene kind of establishing itself on the east side of the state, that a lot of the most influential coaches were also on the east side of the state. So I'm curious who your early influences were and who kind of helped you come along. Who were those people that kind of emerged, whether they be coaches or early influences for you in the sport?
Without question, Butch Briggs, and at the time in high school, and even before really high school, junior high, Joe O'Brien was around. He was a diver from the University of Tennessee. Joey helped, and then I'll think of the name. It'll come to me, but those were really pretty much the guys. And Butch was without question. I want to make very clear, he was the biggest influence in my swimming career. Putting me on the map.
Tell me about why.
Butch was just a real. He was a quiet guy, but he was real friendly. He was very personable. He was very genuine. He always took. You just knew that he was, you were really important to him. And what was really cool about Butch is that, there were people on the team that were clearly not going to be as good as some of us others, and there was clearly some of the team that were just there to be really participants, you know, in a team event, which is very important, or a team sport rather. But he treated everybody equal. Obviously, he had an eye for talent, so you know that's, you know, when you would train, you would have, you know, he'd put the faster swimmers in lane 1 and 2, and then the, you know, 3 and 4 and whatnot. But you know, everybody was important, and I don't really remember. I don't feel like I got like super special treatment in practice where he was always standing in lane 1 with me, and you know, not with the other guys. And guys at the time, it was always guys. We didn't have guys and girls swimming together at the time then. But you know, he was a great guy to everybody.
I kind of want to ask you a question, I guess it's focused on the junior high years, maybe just before you get to high school, as you're improving, because by the time you get to high school, you're established as a very fast swimmer. So I guess that what I'm trying to do is kind of connect between when you start to commit to age group swimming and maybe just before you get to high school. What's going on for you? Are you swimming in like state championship meets? Are you realizing that you're one of the fastest kids in the state?
In junior high. Yeah, in junior high, I realized, you know, at that time, I don't really recall that there were state championship meets, but, you know, we would go to the, you know, to the east side of the state, and we'd go over to the, you know, the big age group championships. And so, you know, you're 11 and 12, 13 and 14. And yes, I was, you probably have a lot better, you have records of it. I don't really recall, you know, was I the champion in the 11 and 12? Was I the champion and the fastest, you know, swimmer at that time in 14, you know, 13 and 14? But I just remember, and it's kind of an interesting story that I chuckle on when I think about it. But when I got to high school and we were at my freshman year state meet, can't even recall where it was, but I remember being up in the stands and with my teammates, and we were just, you know, BSing. We were all just chit chatting, you know, doing, you know, what immature 16-year-olds do. And, you know, and I was up there just talking. And then all of a sudden there's all this commotion around me, and everybody's like, you know, Van Meter, you're up. And, you know, I realized that on lane 4 was supposed to be, you know, me standing there. And I think it was the 50 freestyle. It probably was. It would have been the first individual event. So I'm coming out of the stands, you know, tearing off my sweatsuit and, you know, and running to the blocks. And, you know, it was just a blur to me. And, you know, next thing you know, I was state champion, and I set this, you know, the state record as a freshman, and really wasn't prepared for it at all. I was just sitting up there BSing with my buddies. So that was, you know, that was a kind of a cool story that I like to tell. Certainly on what not to do to be prepared, but that was kind of probably when I realized, wow, I'm different. But I mean, at that time, I never thought like that. But looking back now in hindsight, I look at it and I go, I clearly had something that most people didn't have.
Now, tell me how Coach reacted to this story.
Yeah, that part I don't remember, probably for good reasons. But
you blocked it out, right?
I must have, but I'm sure that Butch that was probably not a very proud moment for him as a coach. And, you know, I'm sure both of us today are very glad that it ended the way it did. But, you know, clearly, you know, that was not the way I was prepared to swim and train. And clearly that's not the way he prepared us. So I wasn't following one of his rules, but
sure.
Yeah, but yeah, that was definitely a motivating factor. I mean, you know, losing it was something that I wasn't very accustomed to.
Sure. It's going to show you the 100 as well. Would you have been in this one as well? Yeah. I see you right there. Looks like you were 7th. You won the console here in 50.19.
Yep.
So, yep. And I think that's a really interesting thing that we'll get into, because you established yourself as a great 100 freestyler. And this is probably a point earlier in your career here where that aerobic ability isn't really shining through in the same way that it will even by next year. But, you know, did you find enough competition? You know, you mentioned that you would have been faster had you had access to a long course pool. But at that time in your career, were you like, when you went to a state meet, you know, do you remember kind of feeling like you were seeing another level than you were seeing around you regularly? Did you feel like you were seeing enough competition at that point?
No,
Yeah.
not at all. And as I recall, the most important thing to me, the minute that the meet was over, or actually during the meet, was, I was always wanting to know what happened in Class A.
Oh yeah.
Because as a Class B guy, it was always like, well, we weren't of that stature. We weren't good enough to be in that. And that was a real big motivating factor for me. I wanted, the only thing I could do, because I couldn't compete against them as an A, Class A and Class B, I wanted to make sure that I set the bar. And I believe I did. It started in my sophomore year, where I set the bar and I just said, okay, guys, everybody in the state, this is the fastest time. And I am the fastest male swimmer in the 50 and the 100 free in this entire state. And I don't care what class you were in, but that was very important to me.
Did you move to year-round swimming around this time? Was there a point where you swam more?
Yeah, I would say more. Yes, when I was a freshman, I would say that that's when it kind of began. I was swimming pretty much full time then. We were doing what kids did. We did have off seasons. It certainly was nowhere like it was in college, where it was a 12-month-a-year program.
Sure. So this is a look for you if you want to see. This is your sophomore year, as you kind of described with that breakthrough. You break 22 for the first time your sophomore year and go 21. 97 in the 50, which again, I mean, this is, for perspective, this is 1978. So there are not a lot of kids, even in the country, probably less than maybe 30 to 40 at this time from my research, that are breaking 22. So you're already kind of establishing yourself up there. And in the 100, you took 4th place in the 100. So I think you'll come back and become the champion of those and really start to do damage the following year. But we see that 100 come down to 48-7 and in the final. But, I guess I bring that up as well to say, John, that there's still some meat on the bone at this point in your career, right? You're a state champion in the 50, but you're not doubling yet. And for a guy that in 4 years from now is going to be one of the top 10 sprinters in the NCAA, you're still 4th in the 100 free. We're not all the way there yet. Can you tell me about kind of the work in progress that you were as a high school swimmer, and maybe also how that 100 developed? Because it seems that developed second.
Well, so clearly I think what that would illustrate is that I had raw speed, but I didn't have the endurance, and the training and the stamina that you obviously need to swim at 100. And obviously later it didn't happen until I got into college. But I was a decent 200 guy, hated it, but I mean I was admirable in the 200 freestyle in college. So I think it was. And I kind of recall that was kind of when Butch was kind of starting to hammer me, saying, listen, if you want to be a good 100 guy, you've got to put the work in the pool. You got to put the hours in. You got to put the yardage in, and you just got to do the training. How old was John Newton? Because at some point John Newton kind of became a factor, because he started reaching out to me from Tennessee, and we started to have some conversations. And I remember having discussions about what was I doing for training, and this is kind of what you needed to do. And that became even more apparent, especially in my junior year, when I was being heavily recruited by a lot of folks. But Jonty Skinner at the University of Alabama, who was the world record holder in the 100-meter freestyle at that time, he and I would talk 3 to 4 nights a week. And he would want to know what I did for practice that day, and what were my times, and what were my repeats. And so, I would say it's clearly in the sophomore, junior year when I started to realize that I got to get in shape.
Yeah. That's a really interesting nugget that you told me about, John, that Newton starts reaching out to you. Like, was he a mentor essentially for you from that mid-high school point on? Or was he present in the Tennessee scene? I totally understand the years. He graduates in 79, and you don't get there until the fall of 80. But like when you got to Knoxville, I know he lives in the Knoxville area now. Was he present in the Knoxville area when you got to college? And was he in your life during that time?
He wasn't. I wouldn't say he was in my life, but he was certainly there. And and as somebody that had basically he had just crossed the finish line and I was just getting to the starting line. And so he was around the pool. We'd see him, all of us guys would see him, in the old, the glory days, all the all-stars, of which he certainly was. We all would see him. So, but yeah, certainly I think I have a recollection of John, reaching out and talking with me every now and then. It wasn't, because of his personality, John wasn't a major influence in my life in my mid to late high school years. But he reached out enough to have some impact on me, and nowhere near like Jonty Skinner at the time. But the real factor, we'll get into that, I'm sure. But the real, there was some reasons why I chose Tennessee over Alabama, and that's kind of a cool story too.
We will definitely get there. And if I've learned anything about high school recruiting in the late 1970s, it probably doesn't start here for a year or so. So I want to ask you, looking at these times, John, is it fair to say that the 1979 state meet was one of, if not the best day of your life up to that point? This is a big breakthrough for you. You dip down to 21-17. You break the Class B state record. This is your first Class B state record as a junior in this final, and a big drop. You had been 21-57 in prelims, and we had been looking at your other times. I don't think we'd seen you faster than that to this point. So this is a really nice breakthrough for you, down to 21-17. And then in the 100 freestyle, 46-83. Again, last year, we were just looking at your sophomore times, you were 48 mid. So this is almost a full 2-second drop during your junior year of high school. And I feel like in looking at these times, John, that this is really, the step where you took a step forward. You also swam on your 400 free relay here. Looks like put in a 40, maybe a 47 plus to anchor that winning relay. But I guess on paper, this looks like the season that you kind of took a step forward and became a big time college recruit. Is that fair to say?
Without question. My junior year was, I was probably on a lot of people's maps, on the radar rather, maybe my freshman, sophomore, just because of my, the skills and the speeds that I had demonstrated. But my junior year was clearly the year when a lot of schools across the country started taking note.
You remember, at that time, you couldn't get phone calls until your senior year. Is that right? Did you have an opportunity to, I'm curious about that process and when some of the most notable swimming names and figures might have started to reach out to you or take notice of you or talk to you. Do you remember any times during your junior or senior year, and it might have been Jonty Skinner, where you're just like, wow?
I don't recall the year when that started, whether it was my junior or senior year. Clearly, John Newton was, because he was from the area. He was from Northview. My mother actually, in fact, had taught at Northview, and I think she may have been John's one of his his second or third or fourth grade teachers. But so I knew of John. And whether it was my junior or senior year, because I don't think my parents would have allowed me to break any violate any recruiting rules. So, and Butch, I know, would not have allowed it. So
sure.
Whenever that period came when they did start recruiting and have interaction, it was big. And the biggest one I remember was the nightly phone calls with Jonty Skinner.
Now, I don't expect every person who might watch this to know who Jonty Skinner is, but in 1975, Jonty breaks the world record in the 100-meter freestyle in a race that I've seen on YouTube. He swam against the best swimmers in the world that day and won by about a body length and a half to break the world record. I mean, absolutely exploded. I think went like 49.4 in the 100 meters in 1975 to do that. And of course, he was a really notable story because at that time he was a South African swimmer, right? And was unable to swim in the 1976 Olympics. So he never, kind of solidified his name in Olympic history. But for guys like you that knew, Jonty Skinner was an electric sprinter. Tell me about what that was like to have a guy like that reach out to you, and as you just said, nightly phone calls.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, to know that you're talking to the guy that's the fastest human being in your event in the, you know, on the planet. And, you know, man, I remember some of those phone calls, they were like, I mean, we might have talked for an hour some nights, but it was 30, 45 minutes. And, you know, and he just kept asking questions about, you know, what are you doing? You know, what, you know, tell me what your reps were today. What, you know, did you do leg work? Were you doing kicks, pulls, swim? You know, what were you doing IMs? It was just, it was really cool because the, you know, the level of interest that he seemed to take in me, and here I am, you know, I'm nowhere near the level that he's at, but it's certainly that, you know, if you're a swimmer in that event, that's the guy that you're looking to emulate. And you're like, man, you know, so, you know, he's talking to me, but I'm trying to pick his brain and find out, you know, the kinds of things that he, you know, that he does. You know, that was really, really cool. And that had a huge impact in me leaning really, really hard towards going to Alabama.
When do you make that decision?
I don't recall the dates of when, you know, when signing date opened, but I was ready, you know. Actually, I think we did it on the eve of signing date, and, you know, I had pretty much made my mind up that I was going to Alabama. And what had happened was my father and I, and my father had no athletic abilities really at all. You know, I don't say that, you know, take a shot at a guy, but he just wasn't an athletic, you know, type person, and he was not a very good swimmer at all. In fact, you know, he really didn't swim. But the night before, it was kind of like, hey, okay, before we do this, let's kind of lay out the pros and the cons, and let's write stuff down. Let's put it on paper. And so we pretty much wrote it all down. And, you know, when it was on black and white, it was I mean, because I had the scholarship. I mean, and it was, you know, we signed it. I was ready to sign it and, you know, and send it back and say, hey, you know, here I come, Bama, and, you know, roll tide. And after kind of going through that with my dad, I was kind of like, whoa, I'm not making the right decision here. And
what was it? What in the process made that, illuminated that?
What really stuck with me was that 2 to 4 year period prior to me, you know, going into college, the best sprinters in the world all came out of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And they were all a product of Coach Buzzard. And so when I looked at that, and I went, man, I got a chance to train without question, hands down, the finest sprint coach in the world, because it was 78 when Tennessee won the national championship. It's in 78. I think Tennessee, gosh, did we go 1-2-3 or 1-2-4 in the 50 free? I mean, it was, you know, Tennessee was that was where you wanted to be if you were going to be a sprinter. And so that weighed really, really big on me. And it was really hard for me to pull back from Alabama, because I'd kind of developed a little bit of a friendship or bromance, whatever you want to call it, with Jonty Skinner, because I'm being talked to by the world record holder, and, you know, kind of gotten to become friends with him. So he was very impactful, but the Coach Buzzard influence was what really swayed me. I was like, you know, if you want to be a great sprinter, this is where you got to go.
How about this cover? This is the cover of the 1978 Swimming World when Tennessee won the national championship, and you got the coonskin caps and all that. I mean, there wasn't a lot of things cooler in American swimming at that time than the coonskin cap, right? And yep. sprinting in Knoxville. So you decided to do that. You know, real quick, to put a bow on your senior year, 21.0 in the 50, just a shade faster, but you had a really nice 100 and took almost a whole nother second off that 100 freestyle. Was that a challenge for you as you're kind of describing, kind of knowing throughout your senior year, deciding during your senior year where you were headed, and you knew that you were on the way to swim for, as you described, one of the best, if not the best, sprint coach in America? Was that a challenging senior year for you to move on and get to this next step in your life?
No, it wasn't challenging at all because I was just having so much fun. It seemed like every time Butch would get me ready and and rest me and taper me and shave me, bam. I mean, I was breaking records and and making people notice and putting people across the country on notice that here's a kid from Western Michigan, cold state, doesn't have a long course pool. Looking back now, I know I had a lot of people licking their chops because they talented coaches realize, this guy's raw, man. He doesn't have, he doesn't have a very good pool, because that pool the old pool we used to swim in was what a dive. But I mean, that was our house. That was our house of victory. We never lost there. We just always won. So no, I didn't. My senior year wasn't a challenge. But one thing I do remember, I was disappointed that I didn't break 21. That was so I was a champion, but I didn't break that big barrier. That was a huge barrier at that time.
And no one had done it yet, right? Of course, Comisher doesn't do it in the state of Michigan until '84, so that's a big one.
Yeah, so that was a disappointment. That lingered with me, and then but I also knew that I was really, really proud my junior and senior year of the improvements that I made in the 100, because that was where I somewhere along the line somebody got it into my head that you can't just be a 50 guy. You gotta be. I mean, there's only one event, and if you can't swim the 100 or the 200 free, which I could not do, absolutely could not do in high school. I mean, to any real talented level. Yes, or else you had to be a butterflyer. So I knew I had to have some other skill, and I when I started swimming faster in the 100, that's when people would let me know, okay, now there's an awful lot a college team can do with you, because you can swim the medley relay, the freestyle relay, you can swim the 100, you can swim the 50. There's plenty of places to put me.
Yeah. Did you ever, as an age group swimmer, develop a second stroke? Everything we've talked about has been freestyle, and naturally everything I see you in state championship results is freestyle. And did you ever attempt to develop a second stroke, or were you always exclusively a freestyler?
I was always a freestyler, but either my junior or senior year, remember which one it was, Butch and I went over to the state, or to the NCAAs at Cleveland State. So whatever year that was, and I remember watching Par Johansson out of
Sweden.
Yeah, well, he was out of Sweden, but I think he swam for, it was Cal Berkeley, and I think he was either the American record holder at the time, or he was the world record holder in the 100 fly. But I remember sitting in the stands, because I sucked as a butterflyer in high school. But I remember sitting there with Butch, and I watched, and something clicked with the timing of watching his stroke and his kicks. Or his kick, and I remember saying to Butch, I go, man, damn it, I want to get in the water right now. I got something. I see something. I can't wait to get back in the water. So when we got back, I asked him, I said, hey, can I, the next dual meet, I don't remember who it was. I said, can I swim the 100 fly? And he goes, yeah, have at it, man. So he puts me in the 100 fly, and I remember doing very, very well. And I just remember that the feeling that I got in the water was, I was no longer, my arms and legs weren't fighting each other. Butterfly is all about timing, and if you don't get the timing right, you struggle, and you don't know you're struggling until you do get it right, and then you're like, holy cow, this isn't that hard of a stroke. It's not anywhere near as hard as it looks if you're doing it properly. And so it kind of clicked for me, and I think it was probably my senior year, because I think the NCAAs were at Cleveland State maybe my junior year, and I did do fairly. I think I won the YMCA national championship, I think my senior year in. I don't know if I won it down in Lauderdale, or I may have finished first in the prelims, and then I think I missed the walls, two or three of the walls in the finals, and finished second or third. But
would this have been like in the Y Nats?
Yeah, the Y Nationals. And that would be something that you might want to look into. But
I will get all into those. That's part of what comes from these conversations, as I learn where to look.
But so I think if I remember right, I think I finished first, which was a shock to everybody there. I think I qualified first, or I qualified well. But that led into college, and so another event that I started to swim in college was the 100 fly, and I had one of the years at the SEC championships. I know I finished first in the prelims, and then in the finals, I stumbled with some missing some walls and finished second. So that's where in college I actually picked up a second stroke, the 100 fly, which is another event. So that gave the team, a little bit of a flexibility, because I was a very formidable 100 fly guy. And then they started breaking me into the 200, and then I became a more or less a fully rounded middle distance sprinter.
So one of the things that jumps out to me that's really interesting with both you and John, and I think I completely understand why this happened based on what you described with your training situation, your pool situation, but you and John Newton both explode as freshmen in Knoxville. You both jumped, I believe, I'd have to pull your times up, but you jumped to 45 very low in the 100 as a freshman. I've got you in 44.94. 44.94 in the as a freshman in the 100, and John jumped all the way to 44.95. Each of you completely jumped 45 seconds in your freshman year. Speak to yourself there. What happened for you in that first year? You don't launch all the way into like NCAAs where you're scoring. You get really competitive in that freshman year where it sets you up for that sophomore year in the 100 to be able to do big things. What happens for you that freshman year when you kind of break through?
That's funny. When I got to Knoxville, and I certainly don't say this to hurt Butch's feelings, but Butch worked us, but I had never worked like I worked at Tennessee as my freshman year. In my freshman year, I did two things. I slept a lot and skipped a lot of classes, and I trained. And that was all I did, because the training was so much of a step up than anything that I'd ever been accustomed to or exposed to. It killed me. I mean, it wiped me out. And so I spent the whole year training and sleeping and barely staying eligible because I was asleep all the time. And it was kind of a joke, because Coach Buzzard used to say that, is Van Meter, all you do is swim and sleep, because you can't hit your intervals. So that put me into 3-a-days instead of 2-a-days. If you missed your intervals at Tennessee, now you're in the water at 5 a.m. So I'm swimming 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., 11 to 1, and then 3 to 5. And so it was brutal. And frankly, my freshman year was a real struggle, because I was at a bad crossroad in my swimming career, because I wanted out, because I came in as the #1 recruit at Tennessee, arguably either the #1 or #2. Bart Schneider was I think he came in as the #1 recruit at Tennessee, and Bart was, if I recall, Bart may have had the fastest time in the country, in the U.S. as a senior in high school. So I'm going to have to compete against Bart Schneider, and I'm licking my chops getting there. But once I got there and I got my ass handed to me I was probably number 6 or 7 on the depth chart in the 50 and the 100. And that was something I was not used to getting beat, and not used to not only not getting beat, but finishing 5th and 6th. And, I mean, it was awful. It was a culture shock for me. And so, it was hard for me to finish that first year. And then what everybody found out, including myself, I mean, I knew I was a good taper shave swimmer, but that's when everybody found out that when you give Van Meter rest and you shave me, I'm an electrifying taper guy. And what we learned from that was in my sophomore year, I actually shaved and tapered probably 3 or 4 times. And normally you would only do it twice. For that, you do it for the SEC, but your SEC wasn't a full taper. It was interesting. That's when everybody realized, because I was not much of a swimmer at Tennessee my freshman year, until we go to Gainesville, to the new aquatic center there, and Rowdy Gaines is a senior, I'm a freshman, and I was a joke at Tennessee. I mean, some of the guys on the team used to laugh at me. The guys in the All-American room would say, hey, Van Meter, don't you wish someday you could stand on this white carpet instead of that orange carpet? That pissed me off. I mean, it ground on me. I was kind of like, man. And then when they shaved me, we go down to Gainesville, and it's kind of like everybody's like, whoa, what the hell? Who's this dude? And it was eye-opening for me. I was kind of like, wow. Because I remember I shaved my head, and when I dove in prelim or in warm-ups, Andy Cohen was my coach at the time, and that was right after Andy had his car wreck. So, he was my coach that year, and I dove in for warm-ups, and I swam the first 25 yards, and Andy was flagging me in when I was swimming, and I stop and I look up and I go, well, what's up, man? And he goes, you're done. And I go, what do you mean I'm done? He goes, I don't need to see anything more. You got too much speed. You need to shut it. You're done. You don't need any more warming up. And I go, damn, I just swam 25 yards, man. He goes, you're done. And so apparently with a shaved head and hitting that water completely shaved and completely rested, he saw so much speed in my first 25 of just warming up. He was like, you got to get out of the water and keep resting and keep it bottled up until you get to swim, in the prelims. And that's when, I gave Rowdy all I had, which was a lot the first 25. But I remember when we hit the wall and we did the turn, that's when I see this little black thing, which was his bathing suit. And I go, what the hell was that? And then, he wins and I finish second. And the next year I go on to win the SEC. But that's how I broke out my freshman year. Pretty cool story. Nobody knows about it, but I almost didn't make it.
Yeah. And I love as you're telling that story, John, like your competitiveness creeps out, I can see the expressions on your face. I can see, particularly reminiscing on, some of those older Vols, getting you in the ribs a little bit about where you were at that point. I can feel and hear the competitor in you come out. So, so you win the SEC as a sophomore?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I see.
I finished second my freshman year at Gainesville behind Rowdy, and then Rowdy graduates, and then we go to Alabama my sophomore year, and that's when I win the 50.
I think this might be a spot where you might be able to speak to some young swimmers, because this point right here is a very interesting point, because I think a lot of swimmers struggle with not just the physical part, but the mental part of breaking through, to go from, I'm not sure if I fit, to, damn it, I'm the best. I don't know that you ever felt during your freshman year that you didn't fit, but you described pretty clearly taking 6th and 7th felt terrible, and it wasn't a great spot. And a year later, you're the best sprinter in your conference. And I know enough about swimming to know that doesn't happen without an evolution happening between the years. Is particularly in those sprint races, John, very rarely does a swimmer win the 50 freestyle who doesn't think he's going to win the 50 freestyle. It's about confidence, right? I mean, like, did that develop for you in that year?
Yeah. What happened was, I had zero confidence my freshman year. None. As soon as I got there, I was something. And then I got there and I couldn't get out of my own way because I was so overworked for what my body was ever accustomed to, that, I was in a physical shock my whole freshman year. But then when I got that rest, which was a complete shock to everyone. If it wasn't a shock to everybody, there could have only been one person that it wouldn't have been a shock to. And I guess that would have had to been Buzzard. But I got to believe that it shocked the living daylights out of him too. And for me to do what I did, because I remember all the guys on the team, when I got out of, when I swam that prelim 50, when everybody saw that, they were like, holy shit, what just happened? Because I beat everybody that was on the team. I became the #1 sprinter at Tennessee in the 50, in the prelims. And so, that's when confidence really kicked in. And I was like, okay, I'm glad I stayed. I'm glad I'm here, and I'm glad I'm still swimming. And I'm gonna make, now we can go on. Now I can continue with my dream.
How close were you to transferring?
Oh, I was never close to transferring. I was close to quitting. Yeah, I was, I called my dad and I was like, man, I suck. I feel like, a waste. They wasted a scholarship on me. Hell, there was dual meets that I was swimming freaking 23.5 in the 50, and I'm kind of like, man, there's people a full body length ahead of me, and in every 50 I swam, and so I was just kind of like, man, this is not, I'm not used to this.
And you were just that destroyed.
Yeah, I was tore up.
Yeah.
And we didn't, none of us figured it out until we gave me the rest, and then it was kind of like everybody realized, oh, whoa, you give this guy some rest and you shave him, it's a different deal.
John, you know, big picture, when you look back at all these amazing accomplishments, whether it was, you know, SEC championships, championship finals at NCAAs, you know, some of these amazing things that really, you know, I can probably count on a small list. I'm not sure if more than 15 or 20 people in the history of the state have so many final at NCAAs, maybe a few more than that. But what are you most proud of when you think of your accomplishments, your times, your wins? What are the 2 or 3 things you're most proud of?
I would say the legacy that I left in high school was important to me. I didn't forget about high school when I got to college. I mean, I was very proud of the feats that I had accomplished as a high school swimmer. And then in college, I would say becoming the SEC champion in the 50, and just becoming, I mean, at that level, on any given day, any given guy, you know, in the top 10 can pretty much, you know, he can pretty much get the other guy. I mean, it's nobody's going to blow anybody out of the pool, you know, at NCAAs. And so, you know, just knowing that, you know, I'd gotten to that, to a very, very high level that very few people in any sport ever achieve. That was very rewarding. And just the college experience was a lot of fun. I didn't quite understand it at the time because, boy, I mean, Buzzard was such a hard ass. I mean, I don't know if Newton, I don't know where he went with all that, but I mean,
we didn't get into a lot of that.
Buzzard was such a militaristic, I mean, borderline SOB. I mean, he was hardcore. And, you know, he got a lot out of us by you know, overworking us. When I see and I talk to some of the swimmers today, and I talk to some of the coaches as to how they train kids now, boy, I tell you what, you know, because I was a guy that had arguably quite a bit of talent, but if I would have been able to train the way that a lot of the sprinters do in this day and age, I mean, you know, you don't have guys swimming, you know, 8 to 10,000 meters or yards a night, you know, and 4 or 5 in the morning, 4 or 5 yards,
5, 6, right? It's 5 or 6 now, and it's high quality, and they're done.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was nothing for us to swim 8 to 12,000 yards a day, you know, in the heart of the season. And now, yeah, it's my understanding that a lot of these guys now are going, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 for the day, and that's it. But it's all high, you know, it's a whole lot of high quality stuff. But Buzzard taught me a lot of life skills in the disciplines, which I am, you know, will go to my grave being very, very grateful that I learned from him. So, you know, that part of making me a man and making me a good, you know, a good person. Because when you go to college, you don't have a father anymore. I mean, you know, your father, you know, you're on campus and you know, you got to have other father figures in your life. And Buzzard, I think, became that for a lot of us. And I've talked to, you know, some of the people, you know, from the teams that I was on. And I remember before Andy Cohn passed away a couple of years ago, you know, I went down to see him and we talked. And, you know, Buzzard kind of became that father away from, you know, from our homes for all of us. And, you know, we all, like I said, we have a love-hate relationship. We love a lot of the things that he taught us, but boy, we sure hated the pain and the torture that he put us through to, you know, to teach us the lessons.
You love standing on top of that one, right? Yeah, on the award stand. You love standing on top of the one. Yep.
Yep. There's nothing better than just knowing that, you know, I mean, you took on all comers and you were the number one guy.
Yeah. It's been very interesting to me to kind of peek into the brains of swimmers and talk to them about how they came out of the sport. 10 years after you were done swimming, did you like swimming? Did you always like swimming? Did you have a point where when you were done swimming, you had to push away from the table a little bit? Describe your relationship with the sport a little bit for me.
You know, there's more things I remember that I'm disappointed of than I remember of the, you know, I remember the lows and the disappointments far more than any of the highs. I mean, you know, winning was what we were wired to do, is to go kick somebody's ass and beat them. And so, you know, not breaking 21 seconds in high school that year, that bothered me. Not breaking 20 seconds in the 50, that's a nightmare I still live with, you know, all the time. Bothers me. Not finishing higher in the, you know, in my sophomore year when I did have my big breakout year in college was a big deal for me. But after, you know, after my fourth year, it was a dark time for me. I didn't know what had happened to me. And Buzzard and I never really got to clear the air, but I'm pretty sure, kind of talking to some of the guys, what really happened my junior and senior year, especially my senior year, was Buzzard. I was a different breed for him because he could taper me a lot. But I was really the only swimmer I think that he ever had that he was able to taper as much as he could taper me. Most, you know, he could get 2 or 3, he could get 3 for sure, sometimes 4 record performances in one 12-month period for me. Whereas most guys, it was, you would train for the entire year for 1 or 2, you know, 1 or 2 pops, whether it was NCAAs or Olympic trials or the Olympics. And so Buzzard knew he was going to be the head coach, you know, of the Olympic team. And so he wanted so bad to have some of his own blood on that team. You know, he wanted to have Randy, Kyle at Tennessee, and myself. He wanted to have us on that team. Kyle was a much better long course swimmer than I was, much better. And he had far more raw speed than I had. And I knew I had a lot of speed, but boy, Randy was something, but he wasn't a rest guy. He could swim fast as hell all season long, but when you tapered him, he didn't have the big drops like I did. So Buzzard wanted us on the team really, really bad. And I think he just trained me wrong my senior year. I don't think he rested me properly for NCAAs or SECs and NCAAs. And I got in a bad mental funk because, you know, I knew I was close to the end of my career, but I was also, you know, I knew I was young. I was like, man, you know, this is the time when most all the great sprinters, you know, really hit their peak, just like I did in high school. You know, when you're a senior, you're faster than you were when you're a freshman. So I expected that to happen. And when it didn't happen my senior year, it was really, really depressing. It was a really, you know, it was a sad time for me. And I was angry. And, you know, and when I felt like I just didn't have it anymore, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm pushing out. And I just remember, you know, going into coach and saying, I'm done. I'm retired. This is it. And you know, I walked away from the water, and when I walked away from the pool, I walked away from it for a long time. And really I didn't miss it. I mean, I still have disappointments, and I still have dreams about, you know, of you know, competing, but you know, so I'm like the other guys in the fact that there are things that are vivid memories of that I didn't accomplish, versus I don't remember a lot of the stuff that I did accomplish. I mean, it just happened. I just don't remember you know, it's kind of black and white, but some of the failures, those are in color.
I hope if there's one thing that I can, if I can leave you with, you know, you gave me over an hour of your time, and I really appreciate it. There's one thing I can leave you with is like, you're a legend, you know, in the state of Michigan. You know, like, you were the fastest guy to ever have come along at that time. You're a guy that 13 years after you graduated, I graduated high school, and I knew about you because you were in every heat sheet, right? You know, so I grew up knowing that there was this guy, John Van Meter, you know, that I'd love to know more about. And I got to do that today, and I really appreciate it. But like, that's who you were, and that's what you established. And I know you know that on the inside, but if I could just say one thing to you, like, think more about the state records and the SEC championships than you do the 20.04s and the 2110s. And I know those wear you out, and I know that's hard to do, but let that go, because you had a great career. Like, when you take yourself back to when you were 6, 8 years old, starting swimming the way you described to me, if somebody would have told you right then that you were going to be an NCAA championship finalist, one of the top 25 swimmers in the world, that all would have been worth it, right? You know, and like, I really was blown away by your career reading. I knew about you, but I dove into the NCAA stuff last night and saw how much you improved in Knoxville, and you just got a lot to be proud of, man. I hope you see that.
Well, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. It was great chatting with you, and I would imagine this will be a very enlightening experience for you to talk to the vast array of guys that have done this, and I'm just glad to be one of the footnotes. One thing, and this is kind of crazy that a lot of people ask me, because I'm with Universal Forest Products, or we're now called UFP Industries, and I work at our plant in Florida. But a lot of we got a lot of we're headquartered there in Grand Rapids, and got a lot of people that are Michigan State fans, and so they're like, Meter, how come you never went to Michigan State? Well, I said, well, frankly, neither of them were that good at the time, but Michigan State really wasn't very good at that time. I think they've definitely upped their game. But I said, for Michigan never recruited me. They might have sent me 1 or 2 letters, but I think the word got out that I was going to Tennessee because of Newton. And at that time, it wasn't true at all. I mean, it's kind of funny because I wasn't going to Tennessee. I was going to Alabama. I'd signed the scholarship. I got, it's in my record book right now, right next to a letter written to me by Bear Bryant. But because Michigan really just didn't, they never recruited me. And so, it's kind of like a life lesson, don't let your perceptions of what something is guide what you do, because, Michigan shouldn't have done that. If anybody's got talent, recruit them. And things could have maybe been a whole lot different. I don't know if somebody at Michigan wanted to take a run at me, because Michigan had a couple of good sprinters at the time. I can't think of their names. But that would have been, that's one thing that I just, I always remember that. I'm kind of like, between the things that I never accomplished that just wear on me all the time, I'm just like, man, I can't believe I didn't get that done. Can't believe I didn't check that box off. But that was one thing that's kind of an interesting story, being a Michigander. I just know that I was worth being recruited, and I proved that. And here I was, right in your backyard, and you didn't even make an attempt. And it's kind of like, I just want it to be an example for a lot of coaches out there is, if somebody's worth it and somebody has got the talent, no matter what you hear, unless you hear it from their mouth, hey, don't call me again. I'm not coming. I'm not interested in going to your school. Unless you hear it from the person, don't get caught up in it.
Well, John, I learned a lot of really cool things about you today. I think my favorite is that you had, quote, nightly phone calls with Jonty Skinner when you were in high school. I think that's an incredibly cool thing. And when I think about writing your story, one of the cool crossroads moment is that night you and your dad are thinking about where you're going to go to school, and you realize, because that's such a such a pivotal moment in your life, that you wind up instead going to Tennessee. And I love some of that stuff. And as I think about some of the things that I'm going to want to write about you, those 2 stories definitely kind of stand out as this awesome access that you had at that time to the world record holder, but how close you came, not just to going to Alabama, but then you sharing with me, you came close to quitting as well. I think those are all just really incredible nuggets that you don't find in the Detroit Free Press archive.
No, never shared that with many people.
Don, thank you so much.
And just know that I think it's a pretty cool endeavor that you're on, and I'm looking forward to reading it, because it'll be fun to read about all the different guys, especially Newton and some of the guys that I remember swimming against and swimming with. So yeah, that'd be cool. And any other questions you have, reach out. That's the dream, John. A book on your coffee table this Christmas. You got it, buddy. Take care of yourself. Yeah, you too. Thanks. Bye-bye.